This podcast is brought to you by B2B Better. Most B2B podcasts rack up downloads, but they never move the needle on pipeline. At B2B Better, we build own media systems that sales teams actually use to close deals. We've helped companies turn their podcasts into revenue engines, shortening sales cycles, improving outbound reply rates, and directly influencing millions in pipeline. So if you're tired of content that looks good on paper, but doesn't drive business results, visit b2b-better.com to see how we do it differently. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Pipe Dream and our 1 in 100 series. Today I'm very excited to be joined by Joel Harrison, who is a fellow podcast extraordinaire. I was just saying to him before we started recording, his show is constantly ranking in Apple and Spotify in the marketing charts. And today we're here to talk with him a little bit about his journey as editor of B2B into transitioning into building out his own media empire. Joel, welcome very much to Pipe Dream.
Thank you for inviting me to be here. It's lovely to talk to a fellow extraordinaire. I don't think I should put that on my business card now. That'd be good.
Yeah, you should get it like framed or something to kind of match that beautiful neon sign you've got behind you. I want to learn a little bit more about you and your story, but before we get into that, why don't we start by you kind of talking us through your podcast as it exists today, why it exists, and who it is that you're trying to reach with the show.
So my podcast, as you can see, it's called A Trust and Influence in B2B, and I launched it about a year ago. I think I'm on almost exactly a year now, kind of like give or take, because I missed a couple of it. I've done weekly. I missed a couple of weeks sometimes, so that's quite good. Why did I do it? Kind of going back a step. So 23 years ago, I launched a magazine called B2B Marketing into a space which was kind of open. There wasn't really anything there. If you've been around B2B for a while, you remember what it was like in the noughties. There wasn't really nothing there. The marketing press, marketing week campaign, marketing used to talk about fish fingers and Coca-Cola and Nike trainers and things like that. They didn't talk about B2B. It was as if it didn't exist. So we launched a business that's grown over a long period of time and evolved. Doesn't have a magazine anymore. It's focused around a community. That's all great. But we took on a CEO, having been a co-MD, we took on a CEO a few years ago, and increasingly he wanted to run the business without having a founder around with creative ideas. So we kind of had a mutual agreement, it was paraphrasing a very long series of conversations, that I was going to let him run the business and I was going to go off and do my own thing, which involved going back to content, which is, as a journalist, is my first love, and to explore new things. And I was going to write a book, and I realized that writing a book was going to take me a long time, and actually it wasn't. By the time I published it, it was going to be obsolete. But I started a podcast because I thought it was going to populate the book, and then the podcast stayed and the book went. So the podcast is now my kind of main vehicle of what I'm doing, and it's trying to position me as a creator, influencer. I hate both those words, but there isn't a better one, so I'm going to go with both of them. Podcaster is nicer in and around the B2B marketing space, and it gives me rationale and license to talk to interesting people about interesting things all around the theme of trust, which I really do genuinely believe is the big thing that's going on in B2B right now, given AI and given cynicism of people and content disintermediation and lots of other things that relate to those things. So hopefully is that a good summary? Does that work?
Yeah, it's an excellent summary. And you've been running it for about a year now. I'm curious to know, what is the difference, if any, in having kind of built a media empire in like B2B marketing, the kind of the media publication, and now trying to build out your own podcast as an individual? Like, what are the similarities and the differences in terms of how you're approaching content creation, how you're approaching audience development, and I guess also the outcomes that you're looking to drive, through both. So kind of walk me through that.
In terms of the differences, I did sporadically present the B2B Marketing podcast, which is a very good podcast, by the way, and that serves a variety of purposes in and around what b2bmarketing.net does. So if you want to know my legacy business, I'm still an owner of b2bmarketing.net, but I'm no longer operationally involved. So it's kind of treated as a product. It's a good podcast. They do lots of stuff around it. So my starting point was a book. And the book was going to be on thought leadership, and thought leadership is the one of the hows, but trust is the why. So, and trust gives me a broader set of things to do. Frankly, I wanted to build a business. I wanted to make money out of what I'm doing. So I wanted to get sponsorship. And I was aware very early on that I'm entering a quite crowded market. There are lots of podcasts. It's, what's the expression? The best time to build a tree, plant the tree was 30 years ago. The second best time is now. So I needed to kind of go, how can I'm going to have to build an audience from scratch. It's going to take a long time. So what can I do? So first thing is I did that's different to what B2B marketing does I have an audio audience, which is growing, but as you know, Jason, don't really, there are no shortcuts. There are best practices. There are no shortcuts. So I very quickly from the word go made it audio as well. Sorry, video as well. So I have a YouTube channel and I'm putting up other bits of YouTube content as well. So I do go to B2B marketing events, interview people live. And so trying to get a sense of what's going on. So there's the two forms of content go up on YouTube. YouTube's got a really nice kind of sponsorship model. So you can boost your audience quite quickly and easily that way, which is good. I've also got a really good following on LinkedIn, so I turn every episode into a LinkedIn newsletter, and I've got a good following there. I've got a good subscriber base on the newsletter, and then I can kind of cross promote all of them. So I'm not just offering an audio audience, which is good, it's growing, but it's slow. I'm able to offer all three of those things. And then most recently, I've actually got involved in doing LinkedIn Live as well. I've done an episode as a streamed episode, so there's a live component to it, and then you can then repurpose that for on demand, as it were. So again, I'm just exploring different components as we go.
I'd like to go a little bit deeper into your learnings over the last year, because obviously, as you mentioned, you're trying out a lot of different things. It's kind of started as an audio only podcast. We're now introducing video. We've got the newsletter. We've got LinkedIn thought leadership, and you're kind of building out this almost like kind of content ecosystem, this kind of content flywheel. What's some of the biggest learnings that you've picked up over the last 12 months? I always say to our customers, the content that you create on day one, you're always going to look back on day 100 and say, wow, we've come a long way. And so, as we kind of mark almost a year of you kind of running your show, what are some of the biggest learnings that you've taken in terms of what works and what doesn't work when trying to reach your audience?
This is great, Jason. Actually, I wish I just brought a cake along, something like that. Now, if we realised that I could have one candle and we could have this, could have been a birthday party, but the rest we're going to get. I think key learnings is that you've always got to be learning. I mean, having done a bit of podcasting before, I was like, it's a bit like if I'd have known what I didn't know, I wonder if I would have done it. I don't know. But so I've learned awful lot of stuff along the way. I read a while, not too long ago, from someone you introduced me to actually, about that you only really know what you're doing after you've done a year's worth of episodes, and so I do feel I don't want to put anybody off, because I think it's a brilliant medium, particularly if you do it, you just don't see it as one channel, but you have to learn. You learn an awful lot along the way, and you've got to keep learning, and that's exciting. I like that as a journalist, as someone who created magazines for a living for 25 years. Because you always want the next episode to be better, and you have to know what you got right and you got wrong. So it's you've got to learn your craft as a presenter, and it's a different set of things. And then you've got to learn how the production works. And then that's a whole suite of knowledge. And then you've got to learn how the distribution works. It's a whole suite of knowledge. And what I feel like I'm inching forward on all of those all the time. I hope that my presentation skills are reasonably good, but I'm not going to ask you for a comment on that, because that would be a bit rude, wouldn't it? But at least I feel like I've been interviewing people for 30 years, so at least I'm reasonably clued up about how to do that. But like last year, for example, you put a comment about the neon sign. I got that in December, right? And I've actually been doing, throughout COVID, I did conferences from this room, and everyone used to say, a lot of people say to me, this is the best known attic in the whole of B2B marketing, but it was like a white wall. So I got a set of, you can't quite see them, I'm not sure, but old magazine covers up there, and a neon sign. So just like put some branding on it. That's the first thing. A little thing recently I discovered, I was here, you should start an episode like you did, with a very quick intro. I was starting an episode with a hello, and this is the Trust Influence of B2B podcast, and this is what we do. And it's like, at that point, you've lost kind of a significant chunk of people already who've just, I can't bother. Tell me what's going on. Tell me what you're going to talk about. It's like writing a headline. You've got to tell them what you're going to say, and then you can go back a bit, and then you can go forward a bit. So lots of increments. And I think the thing is, every day is a school day. I think if it wasn't, I'd probably be bored by now.
Yeah, I mean, like the kind of incremental improvements, starting kind of small and kind of growing, whether it's kind of like looking at your production, your distribution, your point around like how can we improve what I assume is your kind of like home, the home recording environment, and kind of bring that studio vibe to it. It's something that kind of constantly comes up in the conversations we're having with customers. At least one of the first conversations we're having with new customers, which is, okay, do we need to be like renting a studio? Like how much do we need to be investing in cameras? And my point is always, it doesn't matter how much you spend on equipment. Ultimately, what matters is your point of view, your perspective, the story you're trying to tell. And let's focus on trying to nail that first and start getting those kind of markers of momentum behind us. Like we're seeing downloads ticking up, we're seeing consumption rate kind of around the 65-70% mark. And then we can always start layering in the production quality upgrades, later on, right? And it's going to make the content better for sure, but let's not waste, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, and thousands of dollars getting into a place where it feels like almost like a Netflix-esque, production. I'm curious to kind of take a slightly broader view now outside of, your experience in building trust and influence in B2B, and more about kind of this concept of owned media at large, right? Like you hear it all the time, B2B organizations saying, oh, we should be thinking more like a media company. What does that mean for you when you hear B2B companies say that? Like when you hear a B2B company saying, we're going to approach our marketing as if we were the New York Times, Netflix, and essentially build out a media operation, what are you expecting to see?
Well, it's an interesting one. I've been talking a lot about thought leadership in the last year, because as I say, it was a starting point with the book. So if you're a hammer, everything tends to look like a nail. So I kind of tend to hear that narrative a bit more than I hear the media company. And I feel like, and I'm biased clearly, but I feel like brands need a few things, whether it's to behave like a media company or not. That's almost incidental. They need is a human voice, a human interface, and that requires people. And exactly to your point earlier on about don't bother investing in fancy kit and a studio if your presentation is crap, because that's going to come home to bite you. So that's the first thing. And you also need a compelling point of view as well. So those are the things that are more important, that I think are more important to me, and I think that brands need to kind of understand. And I think we're living in this. I was at a panel discussion meeting this morning with other CMOs, and living in this AI-driven transformation world. And there's a lot of how can we transform faster? How can we get our teams using AI? That's great, but actually, if all you're doing is kind of automating content and churning stuff out the door faster, actually you're adding to the problem, not resolving it. And for me, the resolution is a humanization, and that is mediums like this. I am biased because this is what I do, but you see the power of the human voice of the trusted individual, whether that's a senior person who's a thought leader or a customer advocate, an employee advocate who's somewhere down the line within social media. They may not have a podcast, but they're doing something else, or it's third parties, having your own, to your point, owned media, having a channel where you are able to communicate with your customers in a great way and tell stories as well, which is very powerful. You can't really beat that. There's that sense of trust and intimacy which is unrivaled.
Yeah. I think, this idea of humanizing B2B and, putting your people at the front and center of how you market your business to showcase your point of view or perspective on an industry, intuitively, a lot of organizations would just agree with that. Like that sounds like something that should be done. Yet, whilst there are outliers and, an increasing number of outliers, the vast majority of B2B, particularly when you're looking kind of like at the tech, and what I mean by that is like non-SaaS businesses, still looks and feels as if it's 5, 10, 15 years behind. Certainly consumer facing marketing, but also like businesses that I consider like digitally native. Why do you think that is? Like, what do you think is the blocker that's stopping organizations from going beyond just white papers and trade shows and actually investing in more rich thought leadership content like we're creating with each other today?
Well, there's a lot of reasons, but part of it is around trust in the within the relationship between marketing and revenue functions and the CEO, CFO. Because marketing has never done a sufficiently adequate job across the whole industry of communicating the value that it can offer. And so often, the kind of MQL is still regarded as a currency in marketing because we haven't really come up with an alternative. And the best advocates of MQL say at best it's limited in terms of its applicability. It's not completely irrelevant, but it's really not something which is very valuable. So we kind of default to these metrics which the CFO CEO can understand. We've got quarterly sales targets. So building a long-term narrative is seen as something which is unhelpful, which is for me why thought leadership, where you can use podcasts as part of thought leadership, but you can have messages which transcend, go through the entire sales funnel from top to bottom, and then allow the sales team to connect with the sales team and give them ammunition and a narrative they can use, and then content. That's the holy grail for me. That's the nirvana.
So I guess, Joel, like my question here is like, so what is the fix, right? If there is a trust issue, how can B2B businesses and I guess B2B marketers who are listening to this overcome that? Is it a leadership question, i.e., we need everyone sitting under like a chief revenue officer who has a remit and a mandate to kind of like make marketing and sales work together on both kind of brand and demand campaigns? Or is it something else? What are your thoughts there?
There isn't an easy fix. It's a very hard thing to do. The solution is marketers being able to communicate commercial value to the board, and to speak the board's language, not expect the board to speak marketing language, because they won't and they don't. And they think they can do marketing. They think marketing's easy. And AI has confirmed all these worst expectations. Marketing needs to convince its value and the importance of thinking strategically, and needs to place bets, right? Marketing needs to do things which, and this goes back to business model and go-to-market strategy. You need to understand, what is it you're trying to achieve? Are you about demand generation? Is it about kind of numbers through the door? Well, okay, that's a conversation you can have. Or is it about more a strategic account-based strategy? So then in that case, what content are you creating to do that? You can create content around both those models, but you've got to have an agreement on what that is. And as long as you are able to demonstrate you're hitting the board's commercial objectives and you have a relationship and you're valued, then that's fine. If you're in a situation where they're just pushing you to be more and more tactical, well, then the organization probably isn't going to last very long anyway. There's not going to be a marketing leader involved there with any, in any meaningful way, and it's going to be ever decreasing circles probably. The irony is the technology companies can often do quite well, initial stages with kind of a sales-led approach and marketing as the support function. There comes a point where they've got to start building brand and do that. And if they were able to do that earlier, they might get growth faster, they might get longer term value because they built a brand which will pay out. So there isn't an easy fix. It's about marketing being strategic and having the confidence. And the challenge at the moment is actually that confidence being undermined probably as much as it's being bolstered.
And do you think that's a symptom of the kind of like wider like economic climate at the moment? I speak to marketers every day, and I know you do too, who, are being put under increasing pressure to do more with less. They're having kind of budgets pulled out from underneath them, even budgets that were like, approved at the end of Q4 2025. I speak to senior marketing leaders who are then being told kind of coming into February that what they thought was going to be there is no longer there. And so is all of this just like, when you're talking about kind of marketers being undermined, is this like a symptom to a wider like macroeconomic climate, or is this something more kind of like systematic in your view?
It's the climate, first of all, and then it's AI, because AI is exacerbating is basically telling them that you don't need to have all these expensive bodies doing stuff, and you can just put it as ChatGPT, and ChatGPT can do that. And of course you can do that, but as anybody with half a brain or half an understanding of marketing knows, that you're getting slop out the other end. Even if it's not slop, it's genericized content. There's no humanity associated with that. So that is a race to the bottom. And we're in a. There's also I do think the kind of the general trust environment hasn't helped with that as well, and kind of the economic seesawing from certain parties. I'm not going to get too political, but I think you know what I'm referring to. So yeah, it is. That's the backdrop to this, I think.
Yeah, I think what's making me think about is a lot of the SMBs that we work with at B2B Better, who are like trying to do more with less. They're operating on pretty finite budgets, and obviously, as you're saying, they're getting pressured by leadership to try and use AI to execute more volume and increase efficiencies. I mean, there are use cases it'd be good to get your thoughts on this, where like AI can support with the development of rich thought leadership content. For example, what we're doing right now, this is two people with, strongly held views on B2B marketing at large, talking about the future of our industry, and we will come out of this with a great recording that's going to be 30 minutes long or whatever it is. Like, that content, those views, those takes that we have provided, that's where AI can actually come in and help us create more out of this that isn't just generic AI commodity content slop, right? We could take the transcript from this, we could turn it into a newsletter, we could turn it into a blog. Like, obviously, it needs proofing, and there is like flair that you're going to want to add to it. But ultimately, the core of it, the ideas, they are ours, they are our perspectives. And there it feels to me like there is a natural use case where AI can actually help you do more. I think the problem, emerges when you don't really have the point of view or the perspective, as you were alluding to earlier, and then you're trying to use AI as a crutch to help you get there. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think you just nailed it. You just hit the nail on the head there. Exactly. I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and say AI is evil or unhelpful. It's incredibly helpful, right? I could do what I do now with AI, right? And I use Riverside, that we're using right now. I use Claude. I use ChatGPT. I use Fireflies. Probably some other things that I can't even remember right now. Those are the kind of 4 primary ones which I use. One of the things which I really enjoyed doing last year is we have a B2B Marketing as a big awards program, and it's never been until about a year ago the data of that never been used. But you can put that into Claude and ask it questions, and it spits out incredible stuff. But you still got to check it. So you've got to know what to ask, and you've got to check it afterwards. And invariably it takes a few goes to get it right afterwards. Sometimes it's even not right after that. It still hallucinates. It still misses things. So it's a great partner, but it's not a replacement for strategic thinking and critical thinking and creativity. It's an enabler of those things rather than a replacement for those things.
Absolutely. Joel, as we look at rounding out this kind of interview, this has been a great kind of, exploration of like where B2B marketing and specifically B2B marketing through the lens of thought leadership is going. Tell us what the kind of future holds for you. If we're sitting down 12 months from now and doing another interview where I'm asking, okay, how's the pod gone this year? Talk us through some of the ways that you're going to be looking at, growing, evolving, changing your content output over the course of 2026.
That's a very good question. I think it's a risk kind of boring. I think it's incremental gains is really for me where I'm trying to get to. Lots of little things that I know I need to do. I didn't have a trailer on my audio podcast until quite recently, and that's an obvious thing. I need to put one on YouTube, but that needs to be quite different. I need to just increase my kind of signposting along the way. I'm doing it as a revenue generator, so I need to be able to better prove some of the metrics I'm getting from it. I'm getting good results and great feedback in the market, so I just need to improve all those things. I don't think there's anything necessarily revolutionary I'm planning. I feel like I spent a year understanding the medium. I'm definitely not going to claim to know everything. I really don't, but I know a lot more than I did a year ago. It's a fascinating journey. I think it's an extremely powerful medium, and I think it can bring tremendous value to most B2B organizations. It's not easy. It's not straightforward. It's not a panacea, but it's a great thing to do.
Amazing. Well, Trust and Influence in B2B, an amazing podcast, both audio and video. We'll be dropping the link to that in the show notes of this episode. And we'll also be dropping Joel's LinkedIn profile if you'd like to connect with him and ask him any questions on anything that he's shared with us today. Joel Harrison, thank you so much for coming on to this episode of Pipe Dream.
Thanks, Jason. I've really enjoyed it.